Hello team, welcome to another ATPGEO Politics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. Today, I am super excited to be joined by someone I actually don't know very well at all, just getting to know him before we went live. It's always one of those risks where you're like, yeah, then someone puts you in touch with someone else and you featured them. I gave you a thread of Will Thiel speaking about impact on oil refining about a week ago. Really good thread from Twitter. And someone then reached out and said, oh, I know Will Thiel. Do you want me to put you in touch with him? And I was like, yeah, it sounds brilliant. Contacted him. Yeah, let's do a live. And then I was like, I think he's Australian because he's got an Australian flag in his profile. But that's about as much as I know. And it turns out he sort of is, but sort of isn't. Who knows? So Will, thank you so much for agreeing to come on. And do you want to just let people know who you are, what your expertise is, what your background is, and what we're going to be talking about, broadly speaking?
Sure. Yeah, I am actually an Australian, although I do sound like I just came off the street in Chicago, because I immigrated to Australia 35 years ago. I'm a chemical and environmental engineer. I've worked in refineries and oil and gas for about 32 years, and I've been a volunteer on Volia Radio for working on that for now for about 3.5 years. And yeah, I gained a tiny bit of notoriety, I guess, by being able to tell people what's on fire in refineries and then helping to assess the impact of that. And some of the tweets that I put out in the last couple of years were picked up by people like Tartaragami, some of the Ukrainian military experts working for the Radio Free Europe and wanted to put together a damage assessment on the refinery. So I was one of the team of experts that put together Radio Free Europe's assessment about 9 months ago on assessing the impacts of the drone strikes on the oil and gas refineries.
Because they seem to come in these waves, don't they? And we're experiencing, Russia are experiencing another wave of attacks. You've worked in the hydrocarbons industry in Russia. In fact, you're talking about getting well, before we go to what's going on with the refineries and even what the processes are before we understand what the damage is, I think it's important to do that. Just take us back to the beginning of the war, because you were kind of telling me that you know there were missiles striking Sumy that got you kind of I guess enraged and wanting to become involved in something to do with the war. So talk us through the beginning of the war.
Yeah, so I mean, most people who would have met me back then, if they said, "Oh, this guy's gotten involved in assisting in the war," they would have assumed that I probably got involved on Russia's side, because I did live and work in Russia for 8 years straight, and then 6 years back and forth. And I speak Russian a bit, and there's a lot of familiarity with their facilities and their type of doing things. But when I was watching the very first day the missile strikes land in Sumy, it just shocked me into action, because places like Poltava and Sumy in eastern Ukraine are the really idyllic little towns that you probably think are in Russia if you saw photos of them and you've been inundated with Russian propaganda in media and popular culture for all through the Cold War. You probably think, oh, that's the best, nicest little city in Russia. I should go around Ukraine and say, hey, look at this great place, and then talk about Russia. And they go, yeah, it's actually Ukraine, because, yeah, some of the nicest places. And when I was in Ukraine in 2006 and 2010, I thought those places were anomalies. I thought, I've lived and worked in Russia, traveled to Ukraine just to visit, and I thought that these idyllic little places that I thought, well, I was just lucky to walk across them. But the truth of the matter is, there's all the broad swaths of Ukraine, every little town. I've spent the last 5 weeks traveling around Western Ukraine, and it's all like that. It's not an anomaly. Ukraine just is better, nicer. There's everything about it is better than Russia. And to be honest, I feel a little bit guilty that I helped Russia build that sovereign wealth fund that they've been using to attack their neighbor for all those years.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow. So as I was saying, we've seen these waves of attacks on Russian hydrocarbon infrastructure. And I remember before it was like, oh, this has taken out sort of 13% of its capacity. And now you're hearing Reuters reporting 17% of its capacity. And you're seeing all these refineries and depots and gas compressing infrastructure getting taken out. And then also something that I was wondering why it didn't happen before, the Ukrainians appear to be striking the same facilities consistently in a row.
Yes.
And I was wondering why they weren't doing that before, because you'd think, right, your air defenses clearly are not strong enough to take out some drones because you've hit them. So hit them again and properly take out these things. So anyway, we're seeing another wave of attacks that is causing immense, I think, pain to the Russians. We're seeing a lack of gasoline, lack of petrol at petrol stations right across Russia. But before we get into the details of how these places have been hit, treat me like I am the idiot I am and the ignoramus I am. Like, what do we use oil for? How does it get?
Oh, okay.
Like, what are the end products that come from crude oil? And the same with gas.
And it's actually very important to understand that if you want to understand the impacts on Russia and the strikes that Russia's doing, and be able to tie together these disparate little events that happen into what's going on, you need to understand that they're pumping oil out of the ground, out of wells onshore in the north and in Siberia and primarily, and other oil fields they have in Russia. And then they're moving that oil, that crude oil, by pipeline or by rail car down to refineries, and then refineries crack that oil up in either through straight distillation or other chemical and physical processes into gasoline, kerosene, diesel, jet fuel, all the things that you want out of a barrel of crude oil, and maximize the production of some of the things they want, and then they push that stuff out into what are called depots, where they store the fuel for putting into vehicles, or onto terminals where they transfer oil onshore to ships and then transport it around the world. So it's important to remember the difference between crude and between products, and between refineries, depots, and terminals. And I get a bit pedantic about that when people are talking about it, because they say a refinery is being hit, and then I get on and go, no, that's not a refinery.
Do you know what? I'm no expert, Will, but I do that as well. I'm like, that's not a refinery. It's just a bunch of tanks.
It's a depot,
please
right? It's just a bunch of tanks.
Please don't call it a refinery, and I don't know what I'm talking about.
But a set of tanks in a refinery, like Novoshakhtinsk just got hit yesterday, right? And they've taken out, I estimate, probably 12 of the 16 tanks have been taken out there. And that's a critical portion of that refinery because it's so close to the front. Yeah, that video right there. I reckon only the tanks on either end of those rows are fully intact, and the rest have been destroyed in the center. And the heat impact on the tanks on the end has probably been so severe that entire set of product tanks is a write-off, right?
And that's what I was going to ask you about, because I mean, here somebody's saying, no, War Translator saying 6 storage tanks were destroyed and 2 more damaged, but you're saying actually likely it's greater than that. But yeah,
I think because once you've and this is something that Russia's particularly bad at, and they're particularly bad at getting on top of these refinery fires quickly. And with the right amount of resources and with the right expertise, because you could go 2.5 years ago, if you were working in a refinery as just a technician or a guy, a yard worker or whatever, any refinery worker, maybe even the control panel operators, you were probably making about $500 a day, or a month. And the Army was paying $2,000 a month for contracts, so they were bleeding out all the expertise into the Army. And notice those suits those guys are wearing. We in the Western refineries haven't worn those suits, that type of suit, for probably 20 years, because they're not the latest. They're not basically. You melt inside those things, and you form they're only good for about 10 minutes of exposure. And the The foam risers they're using there just aren't up to date. Now, and this is important because I believe this refinery fire you're looking at is in Cerzan, the one from the other day. But,
right, because no one seems to be able to tell me where, or I couldn't find out where this is from, and I was wondering whether it was this one. Sorry to interrupt you, but whether it was this one that was announced last night that a fire's broken out in Neftogorsk gas processing plant in Russia's Samara region, according to firm's data. So I was thinking, oh, maybe it's there, but okay, so it could be Cerzan, which was then subsequently hit.
And I'm not the perfect OSINT guy. I usually wait until those guys tell me exactly what but I can tell you the tank, the horizontal tanks he's walking through. And when I looked at the firm's data from overhead on Cerzan, I think I know which plant that they're looking at there. And I found some horizontal tanks that are that could be that. So I thought maybe that's Cerzan, but I usually wait for the actual OSINT experts to tell me where things are. But then once they tell me where things are, and the guys that I've been working with, like Tartargami, are expert at getting you information, because they'll ask me a question and I said, I'll say, well, I need to wait until the synthetic aperture radar comes out. We can tell exactly what was hit. And he goes, I can get you that. So we then we can tell which unit operation was hit. That Novochakhtinsk refinery, that row of tanks that's on fire, that's really important because I've been talking up the fact that they take out unit operations like the distillation columns, and that keeps them from making products that go in those tanks. But remember, Russia is amazingly short on both product tanks and crude tanks. They take crude out of the wells, and they don't expect to store it for very long. They turn it into product, and they also don't store product very long because they've only been making enough gasoline, diesel, aviation, and things like that to serve their internal market. Most of what they've been doing is organizing, pumping crude and selling crude. Only in the last 10, 20 years have they been working on upgrading the value add of their refineries to be able to make more money. Every refinery I looked at during the damage assessment phase, every one of them had plants that they were building on or clearing area for to build new unit operations to make more high value products. But they've all shut all that activity down while the war's going on, and just gone to crude and whatever they can make. So this is what's key: taking out those product tanks in Novochakhtinsk, that close to the front, in conjunction with the additional refinery unit operations they've taken out in the refineries on the Volga, is key to both stopping production and causing a supply shortage very close to the front that won't be able to be made up. And so I think that there's a lot of expertise gone into these days.
I've got so many questions. Right, so let's rewind a little bit. Let's go to, why are refineries like the ones in Novochakhtinsk so far south? If the oil fields are mainly that far away, do you pump the crude as far as you can and then refine that closer to where you can transport it? Is that the key? Or do you want to refine it next to where you pull it out the ground and then transport the refined product?
Well, it depends. If I was Russia to rebuild these refineries, I would rebuild them up closer to the place where the oil fields are, because cold is very important. It's much easier to make a refinery or a condensate, a gas plant run better. The unit operations all run better in cold weather, than hot weather, because cooling is a big problem in refineries. But they tend to build the refineries close to where the population centers are, where they're going to use the product rather than to minimize. That's what they've done. I would do their refineries in a different way than they do, but typically their refineries pipe or transport. They use an incredible lot of rail transport for oil that we don't in other countries either. And those refineries tend to be close to population centers. The other important thing, the unique characteristic of Russian refineries, beyond the fact that they don't maintain nearly as much tankage as a refinery you'd be familiar with in the UK, is that they also don't have large refineries. They have hundreds of small and medium-sized refineries, but Russia doesn't have one refinery that's in the top 10 or 12 in the entire world. But they do have
Wow.
lots of medium-sized refineries. So that's both a hindrance to them and a benefit to them, right?
Yeah, more targets, which means that there's a safety in numbers, but then yeah,
More air defense coverage required, right?
yeah,
Over
yeah,
7 time zones. So,
yeah.
yeah. So I think that
So
Ukraine's doing a brilliant job of targeting these now. And as you said, these have gone in waves. The very first refinery strike in Tuapse on the top of a vacuum column, I'm watching that happen. And I said, you shouldn't hit the top of the vacuum column. You should hit much farther lower on the column so that you can create a pool fire and do more damage. And, as I've been analyzing these over the past 2.5 years, Jonathan, it's like somebody's listening to my show, because the
I
next thing
sometimes say
happens.
that about my videos, thinking I said this 2 years ago. Now you're starting to do it, and what do I know what I'm talking about?
So
But
not
yeah,
only did they start moving and targeting unit operations in the refineries better, the first round of refinery strikes that caused a reduction of about 15% of the capacity of crude production to be reduced took place over about 7 or 8 weeks. And I said at the time, if you really want to cause Russia a big impact, what you need to be able to do is compress those strikes in time, because they have so many medium and small refineries. They can shift around production and deal with those unless they are compressed. If you hit lots of refineries at the same time, they're not going to be able to manage the logistical problems of shifting their production around as well, and you'll cause shortages both for the military and for the population centers. That's Tuapse.
yeah,
That's the second set of strikes there in Tuapse. And the other thing you said is very important. Sometimes they'll hit one of these refineries. For instance, when they struck all of the strategic storage for jet fuel at Engels and Tula, and then they hit they were striking the hydrotreaters inside Volga and Razan refineries. They didn't hit one very well by my estimation, and sure enough, they came back and hit it the second day. So they're doing
yeah.
a lot of double taps. They're doing a lot of precise targeting of unit operations, and they have upped their game and been able to knock out multiple at the same time. So all the damage that was done over 7 or 8 weeks a year and a half ago was done in a space of 14 days this time.
And like, am I right in saying that they used to either entirely or semi conceal depots, not conceal them, but protect them by building them sort of underground, due
No.
to, I guess, nuclear. I was under the impression someone was saying that back decades and decades ago, Russia had more protection for their oil depots, and then they stopped doing that some decades
Oh,
back, and actually that's now hurting them a little bit, because it would be
well,
useful if they were
that
something
may be
semi.
true. I don't know of any significant volumes that they've stored underground. What Russia went to do was contract out strategic oil reserves to private companies like Kristall near Engels, and then the Proletarsk in Rost, the one that burned for 16 days and kept taking
the
out
the
tanks.
um the Atlas one, yeah.
Yeah, Atlas and Proletarsk. And see, here's the other big problem with Russia's facilities. That Novoshakhtinsk refinery that was hit just yesterday, or Proletarsk, or Engels, those things were built in. Novoshakhtinsk was finished in 2009. That's a pretty new refinery, Jonathan. And for that thing not to have the most advanced fire protection systems in it, and for the Proletarsk, the Atlas terminal, not to have a full fire ring around it and not be able to suppress fires very quickly, because you have to put out an oil fire quickly, or the heat is going to cause structural damage in the tanks that aren't on fire, and they're going to collapse, and then they contribute to the fire. That's why we saw those tank collapses. So Russia's not applying the amount of cooling water they need to do, the amount of foam, nor the amount of expertise to shut these fires down. When you've got a tank top fire, for instance, what you want to do is draw the unburning liquid literally off the bottom of the tank
Right,
that's on
yeah.
fire. You suck all the fuel out of that as you possibly can to some other tanks or rail cars or whatever, and then you basically cool everything around that tank and let that tank burn out. but they didn't do that. They weren't able to de-inventory those tanks. They didn't put enough cooling water on the tanks adjacent. They didn't have water to smother when they had a pool and foam to smother a pool fire. They just don't have the expertise anymore. They don't have the equipment. They didn't build them right. And, you know, like Novochok Tints, those guys in that refinery hadn't been paid for 4 months. Would you be
Yeah, I
really
heard
keen
this.
to
Yeah,
put,
yeah, yeah.
would you be keen to put out a fire and put your life at risk in a refinery where you weren't getting paid?
Yeah, yeah. And so this gets onto a really important subject, which is that, you know, the war started, the West pulled out support for Russia in terms of hydrocarbons, systemic support for the industry, and that expertise went, and I presume then components and maintenance, you know, widgets and whatnot can't find their way to Russia. But the question is, like, what I was wondering, why Russia can't do that stuff themselves, or why can't they get China to do that kind of stuff, or other entities from nations like Venezuela or wherever? Like, what, you know, what is it about the situation that is really hurting them? Why are we so important in the West for helping out Russia previously?
Because the distillation in refineries has been around since the late 1800s, right? The theory about how to do distillation, how to take a barrel of oil, typical barrel oil in Russia might contain 10% gasoline that you can get out straight away. It's called straight run gasoline, straight run diesel. But what you want to do with a barrel of oil these days is take a crude oil barrel, not get 10 or 15% gasoline out of it. You want to get 90% gasoline out of it. So the higher technology stuff that you need to have are all owned by companies like UOP for cat crackers, and multiple Western companies own the technology, own the IP in these vessels, and they've been around long enough that we're not talking about 3 or 4 competing vendors. If you want a cat cracker, catalytic cracking unit, like in Rizan, you go to UOP. You could go back to basic science and do some of it yourself, build it all up. And Russia's tried to do that, or replace its specialized valves, specialized pumping, specialized turbines and things with replacement parts, but they never work as well. And you'll notice when Rizan Refinery about 2 years ago had a shutdown in their fluidized catalytic cracking unit, of which they have 2. They tried to do the work themselves, and when they started up, they had an explosion and fire and seriously injured 3 people, and then they were down for a long period of time. And those facilities that they set up are derated. They won't ever work as to the production levels that they do if you've got UOP or one of the other vendors that makes those things, that is the technology provider, and they can't buy the technology equipment from those companies now, so they end up having to get them. Now, look, they get the stuff eventually, right? Sanctions only work to
That's
do
what I
this.
mean. So I'm going to interrupt you with a question then, which is probably where you're leading this, because I'm really interested in, and we've seen this from many nations and many entities, whereby like what drives a corporation is profit, right? And morality plays second fiddle to profit. In all reality, sadly, that's human nature, unless you are in the ethical consumer you know, domain where you're selling
And
stuff.
I'll tell you, there is no oil company or technology provider that works in that space.
Exactly. So like someone like you mentioned UOP, I don't know who these people are, but UOP, right? I can imagine they've been sanctioned. They've been told you can't provide assistance to Russia, and they'll be like, we want to still, well, that's money now out of our pockets. Like, this is a huge contract that we're having. Like, how can we get that money back? Is there any way that we can help Russia, or these
No,
entities in
I don't
Russia?
think the motivation. I don't think the motivation works that way. Those companies would say we'll comply with sanctions, but Russia gets a hold of an Indian or a Chinese or a Hong Kong intermediary and says, "You buy components for us, and we'll transship them through Kazakhstan or
Yeah, exactly.
Uzbekistan somewhere." So I don't think the companies would. You'd be able to identify them outselling, saying we want to help Russia, but they're definitely in the position that if somebody comes and says, I want to buy, the valve work for a UOP catalytic cracking unit, will you sell it to me? They then just check their sanctions list and they go, Hong Kong, no problem, sell it to you. And then the supply. So Honeywell controllers, Siemens controllers, all these things. When I look at one of these fires, this is why I say I spent the first 35 years of my career trying to prevent major disasters at oil and gas refineries. And these days, I spend my afternoons watching videos and saying don't hit it in there, hit it where the pipe work goes into it so you can cause a big pool fire and cause a lot more damage. It's really weird. It's the world upside down. So those when you get a big refinery fire, they're likely like this Ust-Luga one. It's likely to burn up if you cause a big enough fire, and this is why they double tap them. You're going to burst the column. You're going to have a 3/16 stainless steel reactor repaired. You're going to have all the controllers will be burned up, all the valve controllers, all the, a lot of damage will be done outside of just the oil and gas that's burned up, and replacing the reactor vessels. Even if Russia had the full design details for one of these reactors, they couldn't build them themselves because they've also killed themselves in this way, Jonathan. Remember when they were getting a whole bunch of workers in from India and then converting them to be meat waves and putting them into. So if you're building a refinery in the Middle East or Southeast Asia, a brand new refinery, or doing a major shutdown, you would basically go to Bangladesh and India and just fill up charter planes full of certified welders, very high skilled technicians, but they're just available in the thousands. Where in Australia, we'd do a refinery shutdown or a new tank build, and we'd plan for it to take us a year and a half. They'll do that in 6 weeks. You'll see so many certified welders that'll look like an ant pile on these things working on them, and they work them at long hours and everything. But Russia can't get skilled workers from India anymore because they tried to kill a bunch of them. And so I don't think they have enough certified welders. I don't think that they can get all the 3/16 stainless and the other alloys that they need, because Ukraine also has regularly struck the only stainless steel capacity making in Russia as well, right? They're not just going after refineries. They're going after the things that Russia makes that they can put into those refineries as well. Ukraine's being very, very smart here. From when they first started this, as I start to look at what gets attacked at the same time, very, very smart. For instance, Novoshakhtinsk gets killed this time, about the 5th strike on this, and they went after the tanks that time because they're close to where the fuel gets stored, and they've lost a bunch of strategic reserves. But up in Zerzan and in Volgograd and in the other refineries they've hit, Afivsky and that, they've taken out unit operations that make gasoline. And so they've taken out a long way away the processes that make gasoline. Up close to the front, they've taken out the tanks that hold gasoline. And they then also struck the crude oil piping system and pumping system at Druzhba, which means that they can't get oil. Don't worry about Hungary and Slovakia. They can't pump crude oil to the very large refineries in Belarus, which they were using to make gasoline for them to offset their losses from the last wave of refinery fires. So these things all happened at the same time.
Yeah, there is a method to their madness for sure.
Absolutely. I'm looking at these things and I'm thinking, okay, one of these guys might, now there's plenty, I'm sure they're not listening to my show, right? But because there's plenty of people like me who know this stuff in the world. Yeah. But I do what you said, which is I'm watching these things happen, and we do a thing I call fan fiction. They should really do this, and then 2 days later they'll do that, and I'll say, I'm sure Budanov's listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I think I'm going to send an invoice to Budanov, but
and this is the medal I wanted, by the way. Just this is the one there through the medal catalog. I've circled the one. Thank you, Budanov.
I just want to get an interview with him. Honestly, if they ever said, we listen to you, SBU, or whoever they're listening in and thinking, that's a pretty good idea. I would love to get Maliuk or Budanov to come say that, well, thank you very much. I'll give you an interview for helping us out with ideas on a segment I call fan fiction. that we do during my segments.
So I've got so many millions of questions that come out of everything we're talking about. So one thing I've been wondering about for so long is why the Ukrainians aren't hitting these individual refineries with massive waves of drones. And one answer is actually they might be trying to, but a lot of drones just get shot down. And we probably don't realize that the Russians, they say they've shot X amount of drones down during a Ukrainian attack. And they could well be somewhat correct, as in, it's a long time into the war now. The Russians aren't stupid, like all the time, and they are surely going to say, well, most of the drones are going to come across the border around here, and most of the drones are going to go in this direction. So if we place some air defenses here, then we are going to shoot a large number of them down, and maybe a few get through and then hit the refinery. And then I'm left thinking, why didn't you hit the refinery with 100 drones? Just massively overwhelm a single refinery, and instead of taking out that like fractation unit and that cracking thing, take out the whole bloody lot, and then they're screwed, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
So my thoughts are that they don't have hundreds to throw at each refinery. I think that there are probably between 10 and 15, maybe 20 drones that are headed toward a refinery. And when they were going down the coast of Krasnodar toward Tuapse previously, there were some targets of opportunity that were hit along the way, and then maybe half a dozen of them made them all the way down to Tuapse and struck there, and then probably half maybe get shot down or don't strike effectively. So you tend to see two, but before we were only seeing one unit operation oftentimes get hit inside a refinery. But in the last year, they have gotten much better at. And they're using multiple different types of drones. Ust-Luga the other day, they used both their Shahed copy and the FP1, the brand new FP1 in there. And
I would somewhat disagree, because the footage I saw from Ust-Luga showed a Harrop Delta Wing type Shahed looking drone.
But another drone shown from there was definitely an FP1 flying.
Right. Yeah. Without the landing gear. Yeah. So, but that's the variety, isn't it? And there was another, I forget where it was, but it was
So I don't think they have enough is the answer. I don't think they have the scale of the drones to use that Russia does yet. And I think that there is a certain amount of them that are shut down. But, we're not far away from the night when they can launch waves of FP5s, the new Flamingos. They could use the Palinitsia. They could use the Peklo, the faster ones. And behind those or before those, do what Russia does. Do a complex ballistic, fast, and slow-speed drone attack that will overwhelm the air defense, and you will see numbers of targets taken out the same night.
But that's what I mean. It's like they could kind of do that already, right? So they do have the variety of drones, especially now, and they're supposedly creating what is it, 100 FP1s a day? And if that is true, then there is 100. Well, you take 60 FP1 drones, a bunch of these other types of drones, a couple of missiles, and all of them at like one facility, and then
so the other part of the answer is they have been held back. So there was refinery strikes. The United States was holding them back from striking crude export. So you'd be familiar with Beefeater's work. When they first started striking refineries, I think I might have been the first person to debunk online the fact that people said, "Oh, well, the United States won't let them strike refineries because that is going to affect gasoline prices in America." And I said, "That's bullshit. It won't affect gasoline prices at all." And Beefeater then jumped in and wrote a whole bunch of really good stuff. Oftentimes, here's the other thing happens. I'll talk about something on Volia Radio, and then next day, Beefy will put out a phenomenally well-researched and well-written piece on exactly what I was talking about. And so he's really great about that. So refinery strikes will absolutely not affect gasoline prices in Britain or America. Now, crude oil export capacity strikes could affect oil prices and consequently gasoline prices in America and other places.
Because this goes back to what you were talking about.
They were held back. They were held back from striking crude oil export capacity under the Biden administration.
Yeah.
But initially, the Trump administration came in, and I don't give a shit, right? So we saw during the January 20th to March 25th, we saw both refinery strikes and crude oil export transfer and shipping. And I was like, yes, I was cheering on. What's it finally happening? But then on the 25th of March, they did their last crude oil strike up until recently, because they were trying to show how earnest they were about doing a comprehensive ceasefire. And so they gave that up, voluntarily, to show that in earnest on a ceasefire. And Russia wasn't for 120 whatever. Russia was never showed any interest. So 5 months later, here again, I was dancing in the streets when I first saw them strike some crude oil transfer capacity at the pumping station that pushes things up to Ust-Luga the first time. And I dearly, my fan fiction now is, I would absolutely dearly love to see Ukraine knock out crude oil export capacity in Novorossiysk and Tuapse. And if that happened at the same time the Europeans started doing serious sanctions enforcement on the Baltic Sea, you could see Russia's oil and gas revenue fall to next to nothing. And
so
that
to let
would
people
stop.
know that where Will is talking about is on the Black Sea, where the current Black Sea Fleet house home is in Novorossiysk, but also around there, that kind of Krasnodar sort of area, Rostov to Krasnodar. That's a southern area. Anyway, just sort of. Yeah.
And there's actually 4 export terminals there. There are 3 in Novorossiysk, and there is 1 at Tuapse. I would not attack the Novorossiysk 2 pipeline terminal, because that takes oil from Azerbaijan, and that would piss the Azerbaijanis off. But to be honest, Russia's relationship with Azerbaijan is getting so bad that I could see them having a chat with Azerbaijan and having them green light striking because the ones that are big and obvious are just south of the Navy base in Novorossiysk is the Novorossiysk 2 pipeline terminal, but the other 2 are at the north end of that harbor, and those are all Russian oil that's going out through those. So it would be so easy for Ukraine to strike the tankage and the pumping capacity up just to the left of where if you look right up where the S is in Novorossiysk, right up at that end, those 3 piers that's the ferry terminal. Keep scrolling up. You see the 2 tankers sitting next to that pier? Right, the kind of orange, those 2 right there, that one and the one next to it are oil export terminal for Russian gas, crude oil export. And the tanks that service those are up north of that, right there. That's the first one. And the other one is down and to the right. Those 2 oil export terminals and the piping and the vessels that are servicing those go out through those, the jetties that are the loading jetties are right down on the harbor there.
But look at all this rail infrastructure as well.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just wow. I mean, if you just like went to town on all of this area,
an ideal strike here would be a couple of their flamingos to hit each of those oil storage terminals, and then some Maguras that would take out a vessel parked loading at the jetty, and those things would be down for a very long time.
Yeah, I just don't think Maguras can get through the booms, really.
Or some, however they can sneak it around and do it. The Hur is a very, very, good. So there's that one, but then south of the marine terminal, or sorry, south of the Navy base, there's the other one down there that's a much more easy target to get. But it's it's still in the harbor there. Oh, you're going down to Tuapse. No, yeah. So zoom in right there. You see this jetty at the bottom that you can see the smoke plume coming out of the tanker that's just leaving it. That jetty right there, and the tanks for that oil loading terminal are up on the hill behind you to the northeast.
Right, somewhere up here.
Right up in the mountains up here. If you go up a little farther.
Oh, so yeah.
Though that one is probably off the table for now, because that terminal right there would be a massive mess. but I don't think that they'd get permission to hit those ones. But then the two to the north there that you're talking about, that's all Russian oil, and we've seen them reach those before. So a drone and a surface drone strike there could shut those down, and Tuapsa is easily taken out as well in a similar fashion, because there's a massive refinery there, but the
look
oil.
at that.
That's So that's the refinery. The tanks down close to the water's edge, and the oil loading jetties there. Those are the product and crude tankage down to the southwest. And where you're circling right now at the top, that's where those unit operations were hit before. So, yeah, knocking out that refinery is good, but knocking out the crude oil export capacity there, I would argue, is even better.
Yeah, I mean, wow. Okay, so a question from Vigo, I think, no, from Tom. Says, in fact, does anyone know what restrictions are still are in place now? Are there any restrictions on striking?
There are restrictions now reportedly in place. Eldridge Colby Cheese has added, and this is the part that's disgusting to me, that the United States we all were very harsh on the Biden administration on its restrictions with Jake Sullivan and the practice of
bloody bring back Jake Sullivan. I'd say bring him back.
Escalate now. Get rid of them. A lot of them. Escalation management. We disproved it. We debunked it. We showed it wasn't wrong, but they wouldn't let them use long range strike capabilities of the United States to hit those. They are once again apparently imposing long-range strike capabilities on ATACMS and the cruise missiles that they sell. So yes, there are.
I've done quite a lot of an analysis on this, because the Wall Street Journal came out with that, talking about how Elbridge Colby had this, like, what looks like a unilateral, might not even be known by Hegseth. And this is what happened with the weapons restrictions back earlier this year, when there was like 1 or 2 incidents where Colby had put these weapons restrictions because he doesn't like Ukraine. He's much bigger on China. But Pete Hegseth didn't seem to know about that. And then you've got this weird Truth Social post from Donald Trump the other day, which said basically Ukraine's been like take the gloves off. Ukraine's been like a great sports team, only fighting on defense, not being able to do offense. This was Biden didn't allow this. Slagging off Biden. Interesting times ahead. And 2 days later, it turns out that he had signed foreign military sales of 3,350 ERAM long distance made for Ukraine, missiles to send from planes with 461-kilometer range. So I think this is my interpretation of all this, is that, one, Trump had signed an FMS deal to sell these things and was super excited about that, and said Biden didn't allow stuff to be struck from distance. Look at me, look at what's going to happen. You won't know about this yet, but I'm just foreshadowing this. The gloves are off. And then Wall Street Journal finds out that Elbridge Colby has actually has a process to veto things like that being used, which to me, yet again, tells you that Donald Trump doesn't quite know what's going on in his own administration, and people are making unilateral decisions.
100% agree.
Military policy decisions that are undermining Donald Trump's own decisions over here, and it's just chaos.
And people who are abject idiots. You know, NAFO did a very good job of taking down Colby Cheese before he was ever made the advisor to the Defense Department, and he's an embarrassment, to be honest. Like most of the Trump appointees, working his own agenda. And as you say, he wrote essentially the rules of engagement for use of weapons that are sold by the United States or provided by the United States, and the restrictions on when they won't provide any more based on their own force protection needs. His analysis has proved poor all along. It's a real pity he got into the position he did. And I would agree with you that after the fact, the way they changed these things, like when they shut off arms and intelligence during the Kursk offensive, that, you know, then nobody wants to claim the blame for it later.
Yeah.
But it all comes down to
almost Trump. Certainly Colby. But well, I mean, he's ultimately responsible.
They're his appointees. None of them got sacked, right? Hegseth hasn't lost his job. Colby hasn't lost his job.
I think the larger thing going on here is you've got Heritage Foundation running the government.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, I'm now more convinced than ever that the Heritage Foundation is the Trump administration, and Trump is a vacuous, ideologically vacuous, but also fairly ignorant about anything in the world
Agreed.
person that means he's easy to manipulate. He's wheeled out. He is the mouthpiece through which the Heritage Foundation can vomit into the world. And sometimes Trump goes off piece and they don't really mind. They're used to that. But really, the dangerous ideology is coming from the Heritage Foundation. And actually, you can draw a line from them to Budapest and from Budapest to Russia. And so, that is what I think. And that's why Trump will say something hard against Putin, but then JD Vance will say, oh, Putin's made concessions and blah, blah, because JD Vance is like connected to the ideology that underwrites what's going on in the White House in a way that Trump isn't, because Trump really doesn't have the ideology other than broadly liking dictators. And so that mix explains why we get so many disparate messages. So Trump will just off the cuff say some crazy stuff. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes when he's speaking to NATO people, when he's out the White House away from these people and he goes to the NATO summit, and he goes to the Basilica in the Vatican City, or he has the people come into the White House, he then gets moments of clarity where people with actual knowledge are telling him real stuff. And then he goes, yeah, let's do this, let's do that. And then you're like, yay, we've got Trump back to supporting Ukraine. And then they all goes away, or he goes back to the White House, and then he's surrounded by Heritage Foundation again, and then it defaults to being just a mouthpiece for them. And so essentially it's all over the place. And Europe trying to predict the US is you need to understand what's going on in the Trump White House to understand how difficult it is to predict.
I agree with that thesis in general, and I've long been an advocate for Ukraine just needs to do this with Europe on its own. We were built up all through the Cold War. I was in the United States military when I was a young fella. We were built up to believe that the Soviet Union and now Russia is this major, massive power. Look, they do have nuclear weapons. They did have a large amount of military equipment, but across the board, again and again and again, we see that, frankly, Russia is a second-rate military funded by a third-rate economy, and Europe can do this alone. So if Ukraine's real allies that have shown themselves to be their real allies pulled their finger out, if Australia, and I'm very harsh on Australia's commitment to Ukraine, it's been mostly words, South Korea, Japan, Australia, Europe, and Great Britain can smash Russia like a bug.
And Canada.
And Canada. And the real allies to Ukraine should just start sidelining America. Don't worry about what Trump says. Just get on with it. But they've been very slow to get on with it.
Well, yeah, but I wonder if that's actually happening. I wonder if both things are happening. On the one hand, they are trying to appease Trump still and going over to the White House, because there are some things that the US provides that are unreplaceable to some degree. So some kind of satellite intelligence, and hence why Storm Shadows can't be fired without the US, blah, 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 and this and that, and et cetera, et cetera. So the US does have things that only the US can provide. And also, if you piss off the US too much, then it goes to the other side and then says, well, we're not going to provide that. And actually, we're going to start opening up relations with Russia more. So you've got to deal with the US really carefully with a pair of kid gloves. But at the same time, just to finish, at the same time, the Germany's just said that they're going to be giving 10 point whatever billion euros next year. Norway's just come out and said they're going to be giving 8.5 billion this next year or whatever. So there are nations who are like, right, we are doubling down on support for Ukraine whilst also trying to appease the US.
Yeah, and so I wouldn't say I want to appease the United States, and I wouldn't say fuck you to America. Sorry for my language, but I wouldn't say F you to America. What I would say is Ukraine should say thank you very much for the support to this point to the American people. He should be speaking directly to the American people. I thank you very much for your support thus far. It has been instrumental in making sure that we didn't lose the war to this point. We understand that the administration in America has other priorities and can't commit to helping Ukraine. So be very diplomatic and say, we understand you've got other priorities, and so we're going to press on with our European and other allies. And thank you very much. We'll talk to you in about 6 months. And then just start informing America of what's happening. And as Ukraine starts building up success after success after success, believe me, America will not be able to stay out of it because they want to be on the winning side. And
so I'm so glad you said this.
once America is convinced they are going to be on Ukraine is on the ascendancy, because I grew up in America. I know dozens. I've spoken to dozens and dozens of Americans in this during this war, and in fact in Ukraine fighting at the time, and they said, look, the psyche of America is such that they will not be able to stay out and not be part of the winning side, just from their psyche, Jonathan. Plus, if they stay out of it and they restrict any weapons sales or use, they won't sell any more military hardware to Europe for 50 years, and they will. The American defense contractors do not want to be locked out of Europe, and
Yeah,
so
I, I
just start winning without them, and they will come along. Remember the
yeah.
Second World War?
I had an interview yesterday. I was interviewed by my friend's podcast, and I talked about exactly this, which is that Trump loves winning. Like when Infantino, the head of FIFA, went into the White House the other day and gave him some gold to massage and gave him the World Cup, and he said, you know, this is for you. We only let you hold this because you're a winner, and it feeds into this psyche that he knows how to manipulate. Everyone knows how to manipulate. You've got African leaders coming in saying, "Hey, you can build a golf course in our nation." Like everyone now knows it's open. It's an open secret that you can bribe Trump, right? So you bribe him with rhetoric, and you bribe him in with gold and golf courses and blah blah blah,
planes or whatever.
Yeah, and you feed into this sense of his self-perception that he is a winner, and then when you understand that that's kind of what motivates him, then like he will back. Like he just made a strategic error back in January, because I think if he had gone hard on Russia and hard on supporting Ukraine on January the 21st, MAGA would have gone with him, apart from Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene. But essentially, MAGA would have followed him. The Reagan Republicans would have been rejoicing. He would have got a more united Republican Party, and he would be a winner. Like he honestly, on so many levels, like I'm not talking about you should support Ukraine because it's the right thing to do, but from an actual political strategic point of view for Donald Trump, he made the wrong choice for his own popularity.
Yeah,
on January the 21st.
And look, and he's made that mistake again. Look at how the Alaska meeting could have gone.
Yeah,
given events on the ground, Putin could have showed up, and Trump could have been fully briefed on what was going on the ground. He could have said, your adventure in the Donetsk has not proven successful. You're not going to get anything out. You're not going to take Dobropolya. We see what you're doing there. By the way, have you watched the strategic strikes of Russia, of Ukraine inside your own country? They have been very successful in cutting off your main revenue source in oil and gas. And if you don't agree to a ceasefire today, I'm going to give them the additional weapons they need and green light them shutting off all of your oil and gas capability by themselves with no other help. And then you'll come begging to the, he could have used the coercive.
He promised that before the election. He literally said
that. He did. So he could have used his coercive power that was available to him at the time to 100%. Stop this war, but he did, because Donald Trump only does things that are good for Donald Trump. He doesn't give a shit about the America, but if he can get something for it for himself, looks like. But remember, there's still an opportunity to trick Donald Trump into doing the right thing, Jonathan. Donald Trump's popularity is falling. Yeah. He's headed for a massive recession. His tariffs are being paid by reality will set in America.
When it hits people in the pocket, reality sets in.
He is going to need, in about 6 months' time, he's going to need a win like you wouldn't believe. And hopefully, Ruta or somebody is standing there in the room with him and says, you need a win. The win is sell, not give, sell Ukraine $6 to $10 billion worth of army surplus out of the deserts in Red River, Texas.
Question comes up so often.
Sell them the 10 mechanized brigades worth of equipment and M777s and helicopters, and you sell them all the stuff out of surplus that you have no plans for. We'll pay for it. Get it to them as fast as you can, and they will win this war. You will correct the biggest mistake of the Biden administration. You'll have done the biggest cash deal in your history of your world, and you will appear to be the savior of liberal democracy. Apply his ego, apply to his narcissism, and when he needs a big win, the person standing there that can do that to him, it could possibly trick Donald Trump into doing the right thing. And that's our deal.
100% agree. And I'm asked so often, like when I complain about the US PDA, not Presidential Drawdown Authority, provision of equipment from usually obsolete equipment or older equipment. It's going to cost to decommission it or to store it anyway. So you might as well give it to Ukraine, blah, 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 blah. And we know all the benefits, but you've got these thousands of Bradleys and thousands of Abrams tanks that are not all going to be used. Even in a contingency. So you're like, what? So we were always arguing US needs to be giving more of them, and they did give some of them, but not nearly enough of them. So the question is, well, why isn't Europe buying them? And there must be some reason why that we're not buying.
Canada just did a deal with or announced a deal that they're going to do yesterday. They said they're going to divert some of their $1 billion of aid that they planned, and they do have an agreement with America to buy additional armored fighting vehicles and M777 howitzers and stuff. So that is what we need to see. I wasn't
aware of that detail of that. I knew that it was. I thought it was just in terms of Patriot missiles.
No. This is what we need to see happening. Like one of the critical capabilities America has to sell. If they don't, they're clearly on Russia's side. Is Patriot missiles, right? They're the only ones that make them. But as far as they could, Jonathan, America could reduce its surplus material in Red River and out on the East Coast depot by half, create the third largest mechanized force in the world, and still have half left if they wanted to do it. And it's all waste to them. They have earmarked only 300 additional Bradleys for conversion to this new armored fighting vehicle platform they're designed, they're piloting, but all the rest of them. And you know what all of the Bradleys ever produced, 6,200 or whatever, all the Bradleys ever produced only ever cost $6 billion new. This is why I landed on the value of $6 billion. If somebody offered, if they offered Trump $6 billion for half of his army surplus, just let us go shopping, you'd be the biggest cash deal you've ever done in your life. You'd be a huge hero. And you'd possibly save liberal democracy. Plus, Biden wouldn't do it, right? Biden wouldn't do it. Correct his mistakes. It's
You could easily,
but you got to be on the day. You got to be there when he needs a win.
You're getting a bit of pushback from is it Buzzcast or someone in the thread? Sorry, Buzzcast about Australia saying, look, Bushmasters, Wedgetail, Abrams, Australia has come up with stuff.
However, Australia has provided $1.5 billion of aid over the three and a half years. The vast majority of that was provided by the Morrison government before 2 elections ago, and $1.5 billion pales in comparison to the $37.3 billion in 2024 alone that we made in additional revenue and government taxes and royalties off of commodity price rises directly attributable in the war in Ukraine. That comes directly from the Australian federal budget. So, Jonathan, do you know any country that's in surplus right now?
Well, I would assume Norway might have been as a result of the sovereign wealth fund getting funded by commodity prices. But I don't know. I'm guessing.
Australia is in. The federal government is in surplus. West Australia is in surplus, and Queensland is in surplus. We are war profiteers in Australia. We've made $37.3 billion in 1 year, the last fiscal year that's on record, and we've only given $1.5 billion in the entire war to Ukraine, and most of that was given by the Morrison government. Because
I'm under the impression that Norway, in exactly the same kind of position where oil prices went up, they made an absolute killing from North Sea oil, and that goes into sovereign wealth fund. Their sovereign wealth fund then it generates a lot of income for their government for paying pensions or whatever. But they have actually said, well, we're going to put a lot of that towards Ukraine. So they've actually joined up the dots there. And in fact, there was a video, I haven't watched it, but there's a TLDR video. TLDR News did a video entitled, "Is Norway making too much money at the moment?" So like, how does that affect the economy when they're making too much money from X, Y, and Z? But you're like, so there is maybe a difference between Norway and Australia that's quite stark there.
Yeah, because we're one of the world's largest LNG producers. We produce grain. all the stuff that Ukraine would make for export is stuff that we make for export. So this is why we've been reaping this, like, frankly, like war profiteers, based on the amount of money in aid we've provided.
Interesting. Okay, so we've talked an awful lot about an awful lot of stuff. I just want to go back to the hydrocarbons and just have a little think about gas, because we mainly talked about oil, although we mentioned Ust-Luga, which is up in St. Petersburg area. That is a gas compression. So well, two things before we go on to gas. First of all, there was this point about adding value to crude oil, and you were saying that Russia generally historically hasn't added value to crude oil, and what we were allowing in Europe was Russia to still, and this was kind of the oil price cap, which is we don't want to stop supply of oil from Russia to the world market, because that then is inflationary and blah blah blah. So we want Russia to still supply oil but not make much money off it, and if they supply the crude, that's all right, and therefore we're all right if that goes to India, and India adds value to the crude by refining it, and then we in Europe get the refined oil imported back into Europe, and it's like not Russian oil. But actually, like, though we recognize that, that's fine, because India's making a profit on that and Russia isn't making too much. So from a pragmatic point of view, I don't mind that too much. The point is your price cap working, etc., etc.
I would accept that view if the United States and Australia were doing their part, but they're not. Australia is like the third largest benefactor of the Gujarat refinery's final product. You know, we're reaping it on. Not only are we reaping it on oil and commodity exports, we're getting reduced price for gasoline coming in from Gujarat, and oil and fuel oil and crude and aviation and everything. Australia is we are profiteers, frankly. We really are. And the government now says, oh, we can't track those, which is BS. We've been able to track ships from, you simply track every ship that every every super tanker that's carrying final product from the Gujarat refinery, and don't let them enter Australian waters. We'd be paying a few cents more per liter for petrol, but we'd be starving Russia of money that they can make, because India won't be able to sell that product just everywhere. All of us, if we were all doing what we needed to, Jonathan, I'd be okay with the theory that let them sell crude at a loss or at no net revenue, no net profit, and go with it. But I can't think of, well, there's a couple, there's Estonia, Denmark, there's a few, but imagine how easy it would be to crush Russia here if all of us just accepted 0.5% of our GDP. If all of its allies said, we're going to spend 0.5% of our GDP on military buildup, and we're going to give all of our existing equipment as we do that buildup to Ukraine, and we're going to put it on budget. It's not going to be a bake sale, or we're going to do it on a whim. We're going to put it on budget so that Russia sees $200 billion of military aid coming to Ukraine ad infinitum until this is over. They'd be done.
Yeah, the Estonians came out with a report that was somewhat similar to that. Like, if we all did 0.25% of GDP for the support in Ukraine,
you wouldn't end up having to spend the money.
Yeah,
you wouldn't have to spend the money, because the powers that be inside Russia, the Siloviki and the people that run the security apparatus, would say, yes, they really do mean it, and absolutely they're going to be there as long as needed because it was on budget. They would realize that the war's lost for them. The people,
yeah. And going the other way, so that's talking about like oil products coming out of Russia. We talked about like how sanctions are evaded by you sell your widget to someone who sells it to someone else, who sells it to someone else, sells it to someone else, and then it gets exported to Kazakhstan, and then Kazakhstan get it across the border. Now, I guess the one silver lining to this, well, there's a couple of silver linings. As a video says, sanctions do not work as a prohibition, but they work more as a chokehold and slow things down and strangles the throughput. And actually what it does do is that if you are Russia and you're having to buy a widget through that long process, everyone in that process is taking a cut. So where I used to sell a widget to Russia directly, they would get it at like my normal profit rates, right? So,
and in 3 weeks.
and in 3 weeks. And now you're having to buy it by going all around the houses, and that everyone's taking a cut. So when they do get it, it's just very much more expensive, just naturally. And so that is one kind of, I guess, benefit, or at least, like, even if they do get the bit of kit, it is just insanely more expensive.
Yeah, so I agree with that. That there are always greedy people that are going to help evade sanctions. So Vigo's correct that it's a chokehold. But imagine this, where sanctions do work because you physically can control it. Those shadow fleet tankers are an environmental disaster waiting to happen, each and every one of them. They don't meet the standards. They're usually out of date. Their crews aren't up to snuff. They're not insured. They are literal time bombs carrying profit for Russia. And if the Baltic Sea had, if the European nations that border the Baltic Sea developed some intestinal fortitude to enforce the sanctions we already have in place under IMO regulations that Russia itself is signed up to, we could stop those tankers from moving, take them off the water, and take them out of service, because it's not and they've happened already. It's not a matter of time of if, it's a matter of when a major environmental disaster is going to occur with shadow fleet tankers coming out of the Black Sea or coming out of the Baltic Sea, getting off the Africa, doing ship-to-ship transfers, which are the most dangerous activity you can do with an oil tanker, and they're doing it regularly to hide where this oil comes from, and then wash it, and then they can take it into a UK port or whatever. Those shadow fleet, those are and Russia's not wearing any of that risk. If one of those things has a disaster, the people whose coast it's off is going to pay the full price, because Russia's not insured and they don't care.
Those are the negative externalities, as they're called in economics, of that process. And so it's really good news to hear that the EU is preparing its 19th package of sanctions. So they are still going hard on Russia, but they admit that actually there's not much more we can do. We've kind of exhausted all the options. So their 19th package is going to concentrate on the shadow fleet, which you're saying is still really important to do. And they've admitted that, or they've declared that it's up to the US now. The US are the big players now in terms of sanctions. Like, if we really want to hurt Russia, the EU has kind of exhausted most of the options. It's about closing the loopholes, hitting the shadow fleet. But in terms of the actual crude and refined products, there's not a lot more the US.
There's one more thing they could do. There's one more major thing they could do. So you have the right to inspect tankers when they traverse your exclusive economic zone, and it's an easy process. Basically, as they're coming past, you see them, you radio them, and you tell them, please fax over your proof of insurance and your bill of lading showing your flag and what you're carrying, where you're carrying from. And if they don't do that, then you have the right to board them, and you can inspect them for everything. And when you do that, you can then impound those. But
they were starting to do that around Finland,
but then they got warned off by the Su-30s. You've got to be willing to back it up. You've got to be willing to say, Russia, that we so believe in this that we will go to war with you if you don't comply with these regulations. And believe me, Russia will back down. They do. They cannot sustain it. But there's one thing.
Go hard or go home.
The European Central Bank has never developed legislation like the U.S. Treasury did. The Office of Foreign Assets Control, the OFAC secondary sanctioning on people, has been, in my opinion, the most effective enforcement tool for sanctions ever developed. And Janet Yellen deserves a Medal of Freedom for her application on that, because it is chilling to Chinese and Indian refiners. When they get told they're going to get smacked with OFAC listing, they stop the activities immediately. Now, of course, the tankers all run for the weeds. They get reflagged and do all these other things, and then they come back and show up. But I'm telling you, sanctions can work if you enforce them.
I said, hallelujah, brother. I'm not religious.
Why does the ECB not develop that? It's an easy. They can just copy and paste.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the practicalities of that, but what I have said many times to my audience is that one of the biggest, most successful things the US was doing under Biden that really didn't get the props it deserved was the Treasury Department doing a whole bunch of stuff and enforcing it. right? And so Janet Yellen and all her peeps were doing things that really hurt Ukraine, but hurt Russia. But it takes time, right? All of these things, they build up and build up, but you've got to keep at it. And then what happened when Trump came in is he stopped the enforcement, and that undid all of the actually really genuinely bloody good work that the Treasury Department, I was arguing that I think it was almost more important that they were receiving sanctions from the Treasury Department than military aid from the Department of Defense. Like, it was that important.
I agree that this war could be easily won by Europe and Ukraine's other allies if the United States simply kept the sanctions regime in place and kept up the intelligence sharing that they're doing.
100%.
All the rest of it could be done by Europe. And, you know, if they want to sell army surplus, they want to sell weapons, that's important. But essentially, just the intelligence sharing and the sanctions enforcement through the OFAC listing are the two main things that the United States can do. And we have seen, despite J.D. Vance's proclamation yesterday, they have reduced OFAC listing. They've delisted some entities. They delisted some others so that they could participate in that sham Alaska summit. You know, Trump is just waiting for the reason to normalize relations with Russia. And if 100%. He does that, economically, Russia is going to be saved. And if they're saved, this war goes on for another 10 years.
Yeah.
They still won't win. They still won't win, but 10 more years.
I agree with everything you said. Before we sort of finish up with going to that gas conversation, I just need to cross the T's and dot the I's in terms of some house stuff here. So Valeralco and AJ Simo, who are in the chat, and it's great that you are both live in the chat. So where's AJ Simo? So here you are. You have both won a raffle prize from Jiggers Paw, and we announced that with a live raffle. I don't know if you know about that. Please check your inbox for emails, because you would have been sent an email from Jiggers Paw for winning one of our raffle prizes for that fundraiser.
Good on
you. Thank you for you guys. And actually, no, before we get into the gas, there was a question that was directly relevant to what you were just saying. So how many ULCC and VLCC do Russia possess? I don't even know what that means. I'm sure it's a type of ship. Their fleet consists of smaller sized vessels. Then their cargo is transshipped in open waters. Someone outside Russia is making a killing. Well, the Greeks, I think.
Yes, the Greeks
and the
primarily. Robin Brooks did a good breakdown on all the vessels that they've got. I don't have that in front of me. I would pull that up, Vigo, and you can see both the volumes and the flag, where the origin of those vessels in Robin's thread. You're right. They're not super tankers, but they are very large tankers, and they're old, tend to be Greek, and there are some others, but primarily the Greek shipping magnates have made an absolute packet off this war.
Yeah, for sure. And from Paul Gilbert, thanks, Paul, for your super chat. Is Saudi still importing Russian oil for domestic use and exporting their own oil in substitution? I wasn't aware of that. Why is no one talking about this? I'm not talking about it because I wasn't aware. But I don't know if you know anything about this work.
They're doing some of that still, but primarily what Russia's done now is they're trying to pump up their own crude export, because Russia's not at this point worried about profit. They're only worried about revenue. Their sovereign wealth fund ran out of euros and dollars, I contend, in mid-July. And in order to fill that up, they have to sell either product or oil. So it doesn't really matter if they're making any money off it. They just have to make revenue off it. So what they've done is, as these latest refinery strikes have happened, is they're trying to pump up their crude export. And they're also, and some of that is going to Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia just wants to capture market share as the price is low, and OPEC's actually relaxed the volumes restrictions so that Saudi Arabia can do that. And the other thing Russia is doing is they're making a lot more first cut gasoline and diesel, as I said, through the distillation process, and they're dumping that heavy fuel oil on the open market, because they're a higher advanced unit operations to maximize gasoline aren't functioning because they've been blown up. So they're making a lot of low quality product, dumping it on the market. India's sucking that up too, because they use a lot of that in order to keep up with the gasoline and diesel fuel production that they need to have inside the country. And look, there are others. Saudi Arabia and others are definitely taking advantage of Russia. China's taking advantage of Russia. India's taking advantage of Russia. But what we need to see is all the European countries get off as much as possible oil and gas. And we'll move to gas then now when you're ready to talk about that.
Yeah. Well, actually, so gas. So Ust-Luga was hit. One presumes like Russia made a lot of money on exporting gas to particularly Europe. I think they were hoping to export gas with pipelines to with the Siberia pipelines.
The power of Siberia too. But China said we won't pay for it.
Yeah, exactly.
And we want cheap gas.
Yeah, so China know that they can drive a hard deal. Russia are desperate, and the problem with Russia being desperate is, of course, everyone can take advantage, and the sharks just start circling. But and Russia have to give in to that because they got no options. But so they were exporting gas. Then the Nord Stream pipeline got blown up. Could well have been done by Ukrainians, as I discussed the other day. And then we have some interesting moral, philosophical discussions, but we've already been there. But anyway, taking out Nord Stream gas pipelines, then you've got other options. But really, Europe was then forced to wean themselves off Russian gas, and then the alternative would be American liquefied natural gas, which is when you take the gas and turn it into liquid form, then you can whack it on a boat and you can transport it without having to have pipelines, because pipelines are incredibly expensive long-term projects. I mean, they're expensive, but then they're cheap once they're just up and running, I presume. So Russia are in a bit of a problem now that they can't export gas by pipeline, but then I understand they can't easily turn off the gas. So they were going through a period of actually burning the gas off because they didn't have a way of storing it, and maybe turning it into LNG to then export it. But then you've got Ust-Luga, which is an LNG compression. I guess I don't know. That was it.
Ust-Luga's facility is basically condensate. When gas comes out of a well, they do a knockout drum on it, and they knock out all the liquid that they can initially, and that stuff's called condensate. The rest of the gas then goes to an LNG facility or goes to pipe gas, right? They pipe a lot of gas into Europe too. But what Europe did is they banned people from re-exporting gas, because like Spain in particular was making a lot of money, and France in particular were making lots of money off taking Russian gas and then re-exporting it from their facilities, or taking in LNG and turning it back into pipe gas and then reselling that. So Europe banned doing that, and now you can get Russian gas for your own energy use, but you're not supposed to take any and resell any of it. And so that has crimped Russia's gas production. And so they want to switch to doing more LNG themselves, more liquefied natural gas. But they've had to shut down the Murmansk liquefied natural gas, because here again, they don't have the expertise to be able to finish, operate, and maintain these highly complex facilities like LNG facilities.
Was that the facility that got hit by a Ukrainian drone that didn't explode? It exploded on the side of it.
That was Komi. And what you see then, but what you see at Komi is a facility that is the knockout approach. That the gas comes out of the well, they knock out the easily condensable material, and that condensate. You saw that tank bleeding out clear, kind of a milky liquid stuff. That's gas.
I thought that was water. I thought that was water.
That's unstabilized condensate. Unstabilized condensate goes to Ust-Luga, and it goes through the condensate stabilization and fractionation process, and they can produce naphtha and fuel oil and some other products, kerosene, from that. Those products like naphtha, that is gasoline, right? It's just straight chain naphtha, but you can mix that in and make gasoline. There's no restriction on Russia exporting and selling that stuff. So knocking out that condensate processing facility is very important. So here's the kicker. Here's the real frosting on that pie from Ust-Luga, though. They just 2 weeks ago opened up, finished construction on their compression facility so that they can produce LNG, the gas products from Ust-Luga, through a cryogenic facility. So but the cryogenic facility won't run unless the condensate stabilization process got hit, and they knocked out the condensation stabilization process. So they just built a multi-billion-dollar facility that they can't run because the facilities ahead of it got blown up. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. That's the Comey picture of that. I just
That
thought that was water coming out from a pipe that
no
was used to like
un,
cool or yeah,
unstabilized condensate, and so they do that at the wellhead, right? Like you said, why don't they process stuff at the wellhead? They do process gas at the wellhead to knock out the material that would cause them problems when piping it, right? Because you can't have condensate condensing inside your gas turbines and your compressors and things like that. So you can't have that. So they do knockout of all the easily condensable material. Then the condensate goes down to a place like Ust-Luga, gets processed into valuable material and sold on the international market up until 2 days ago. And the gas then goes into an LNG or a pipeline as piped gas, but not anymore.
So it's just a case of both and in terms of like they need to take out gas and oil and all the different areas of process and just knock out but then in doing so, will Europe get hurt in terms of
Somewhat. So
inflation? Yeah.
yeah. So knocking out crude and gas export capacity will definitely hurt world markets eventually.
Yeah.
But knocking out refineries and starving Russia of product inside the country has no effect whatever on world economics. And in fact, could arguably reduce pressure on world economics because it requires Russia to export more crude. And then that relaxes the price of crude, which can be bought by everybody. But what
Because
we
then there would be a higher demand for refined products to then feed back into Russia, right? So it's like if we take out the refineries but keep the crude oil production viable, then Russia has a complete lack of gasoline and petrol and kerosene and whatnot, and then they have to export more crude, which they're not making a great deal of money on because X, Y, and Z.
Because
And
the
then
price of a
and then that
barrel of crude is about 1/6 the price of a barrel of gasoline.
yeah.
So the value, no value add there. So, but what I really want to see him do is I want to see him do a bit of both, right? Because you're never going to shut all of it off. What I want to see is I want to see them keep the Druzhba pipeline down. I want to see them hit the gas compressors that send gas to Ust-Luga for export as LNG. I want to see them potentially hit. If you want to see a very large boom, I'd love to see them hit the LNG facility at Vysotsk, way up by Lake Lagoda, by the Finnish border, because if they were able to blow up the liquefied natural gas storage at Vysotsk, that explosion would be so large it might take out the refinery next or the oil export terminal next to it without any additional missiles. And because at the end of the day, what I want to see him do, Jonathan, is I want to see him hurt crude oil export capacity and gas export capacity so much that they need to start closing in wells. Because if Russia is forced to close in wells, those things don't just turn on and off like a water tap. They will have a difficult time getting back up to full production if they force them to close in wells because Russia doesn't have enough expertise inside the country and the equipment to do enough well workovers and stimulation to be able to get back to full production, despite the fact that Schlumberger and now Weatherford are back in Russia helping them. Schlumberger never left, and Weatherford is back in there, and those two companies ought to have the living shit sanctioned out of them.
So it's interesting that we've seen recently from some of these drone strikes on refineries and maybe Ust-Luga as well that there appear to be no air defense systems around many of these, that they're shooting so often at these drones close to the refineries with small arms fire. It's quite incredible.
Yeah, it is incredible. Now, they have fired at some of these things with their Pantsir systems, but Pantsir are pants, Jonathan. They don't work as well as written on the side of the tin. The missile systems don't seem to be able to lock on effectively to the
We've
small
seen a lot of
drones.
problems with them. The Primary unit in Crimea has shown a bunch of Pantsir missiles
And
missing.
did you notice how those missiles are corkscrewing as they come out of those
Yeah,
things?
yeah,
And I think that the Bobers, those Bober, larger Bober drones
yeah.
that have short range, I think they've got some EW on them, because
Right.
those missiles are making a characteristic "I've lost track of my target" sort of spiraling.
I wonder if I can
And then the
find that.
guns, the radio, or sorry, the radar controlled gun systems don't even work. That's why you see them putting them on towers, making these like old Flak-Sturm towers, like in World War II. They're putting them on towers, a mobile air defense system. They're mounting on top of 40-meter towers so that the radar can have some look down capability and have some hope of tracking and shooting down the drones that Russia's using. But those systems were supposed to be able to shoot down cruise missiles and drones, but they just haven't been effective at doing that. So those and the S-300 and S-400 systems regularly get killed by the very systems they were designed to defend against.
Yeah.
So Russia's kit just doesn't work.
Yeah, and long may that continue.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Although you notice that Putin mounted 15 of them around his palace up at
Yeah.
Valdat.
So yes, and you see them in Moscow on top of like
No wonder they don't have any at Ust-Luga, right? Because they're
yeah,
all protecting Putin's palaces, and I love that too.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I think we pretty much covered most basic areas. Is there anything else that you think we haven't covered that's important for the audience to understand with regard to hydrocarbons industry in Russia and how Ukraine is going about trying to hammer it?
No, no. I think that we need to see them using all their indigenous capabilities to do as many strikes in compression as possible on crude oil, LNG, gas export, and these refineries. They all need to keep happening because they both starve Russia of essential export dollars, and they will cause them logistical and social and economic problems inside their country, which are just invaluable to pressuring Russia to stop this war. Starving Russia of money is the best way to stop this war.
Absolutely, completely agree with that. This is one of my. It's what I keep saying, that the military, Ukraine prevailing militarily is contingent upon Russia economically collapsing, and I think that has to happen.
Yeah,
It's my personal opinion.
people cheating sanctions won't make a bit of difference if they don't have the euros and dollars to pay for that technology.
Yeah, yeah. Fascinating. Well, look, I'm just going to do a few bits of, thanking viewers and whatnot for helping out with the channel. So thank you, Johnny Nedregard, some Norwegian love there. Kevin Forst, always a superb supporter with ATP Geopolitics memberships there. And there is a question for us to end with, possibly. Thanks again to Paul Gilbert for that question and super chat. Thanks to BME, a little for Yorkie Brew, Yorkshire tea. I've just finished my Yorkshire tea. I need another one. Always need more. Thanks, BME. Love your conversation and the chat, says Tahir from Norway. Have a nice day, all. We have AJ Simo, superb stream, very informative, learned a lot. Cheers, JP, and a big thanks to Will. So that's really, really kind. So thank you. Also, some general love for you here. So let's go through some of that. What an interesting guy. Good on you, JP. I think she's talking about me. Definitely.
She must be. She's definitely not.
I say she. I don't know. Smith is he or she. Actually, I've always been wondering this. As soon as there's a bit of purple in there, my brain just goes to gender like prejudgments but Smith, anyway, this is like, this is where pronouns are really useful. They say, what an interesting guy, obviously talking about you. So thanks, Smith. Gville Hiker says, thank you to Will for joining with JP for this very informative discussion. Will is a great guest, says Ed Jones, speaks a lot of sense. And just a comment from Clyde Cito. Heritage is indeed the plague affecting the administration, and Vance Thiel Musk as Cankel's successor.
Oh, by the way,
are the real
Thiel,
villains and threats.
That's Peter Thiel, no relation, by the way.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. Good point. Yeah. Stop having a go at Will. Great stuff, Will. Thanks. So that's another supporter in here. Anthony Mordecai says, brilliant analytical discussion, both just the questions we have all been asking, and why has this not been done so far? So obviously referencing sort of the types of attacks we were talking about earlier. Also, it's good to hear that the damage is more or less unrecoverable for Russia. Mitch Mazarola, Mitch from Canada. Thanks, JP and Will. Appreciate the live stream. Thanks, Mitch. Good to have you on board. Great to hear from you, my man. What was that last question? Oh, and also the Valeralco who won in the raffle. Oh no, I arrived too early. Now I have to hear how Jonathan slurs his words at one-time speed. So if you arrive on time, this is a live stream, and so I've been advising people to listen on 1.25, 1.5, 1.1075. I listen to all my YouTube videos and podcasts and books at higher speed because I don't have enough time in the day, and my brain is now attuned to hearing. And when people speak like at live speed that I'm used to hearing on 1.75, I'm like, you sound really ill. Are you all right? You sound weird.
Are you okay?
Yeah, exactly. Question here. Why does Russia hit civilian targets and not more military or critical infrastructure?
Because they're fighting a different war than Ukraine is. Russia is fighting a war to outlast Ukraine and its partners because they believe Ukraine can be forced to quit. Because if they can cause America, Europe, everybody to stop supporting Ukraine because of the horror. They want horror. They like their meat wave attacks because they're horrible. People read these things and they go, oh my God, how can these people be so horrible? We've got to make this stop. They want to cause everybody to say we need peace at any cost. Look at the language that comes out of J.D. Vance and Trump. We just got to stop the killing. Well, Russia can stop the killing anytime by going home, but they're not interested in doing that. They're fighting a war of terror, and they're fighting a war of maximum damage and attrition because they think you will all give in just so that you don't have to see this horrible war going on anymore. Whereas Ukraine is systematically picking apart strategic targets and is defending valorously, given the limited resources they've got on the front lines. That's my answer.
I would add a little bit to that and say that also be careful, because I would say the Russians probably are hitting more military and industrial targets than we realize
today.
Because of operational security and also electronic warfare will send things off into. They'll be going for military industrial complex targets that are quite near to civilian targets, and then when you send them off line with either air defense or electronic warfare, they will go into civilian areas. So some of those attacks on civilian areas will be trying to hit industrial targets, but they also don't care about human lives and don't care about morality. So it's a mix of all of that.
But I will note that from talking to some of the people that have been at the front more recently, while I've been in Ukraine, Russia is switching to use things like Shahed drones. They are using them in a more military purpose these days out of necessity. But the rest of that stands. They are attempting. If there are military targets close to the front, they're definitely trying to use those on concentrations and control points and command and control and all that. But if you attacks in Lviv, attacks in Kiev, attacks in all around the center of this country, they are trying to hit air bases when they think the F-16s are there. But primarily, I can tell you the places that I've seen hit in the bigger cities are just trying to create terror.
Just being bastards. This has just come out from Novashak Tints, and I thought you might be interested in seeing this. I presume you haven't seen it before, because I think this is kind of hot off the presses, and this might give you an understanding of some of the damage that's been done to Novoshakhtinsk. So I don't know how much you can see from this. I haven't seen this yet myself, but there are some glimpses like from there. obviously vehicles, but you want to be looking at some of that other
Look at
infrastructure.
look at those pipeways sagging and the cable runs. Yeah, they've ruined a lot of infrastructure there. Get away from that vehicle. I wish I could shout at people live when they're shooting video and go, no, focus over the, because they always focus on things they think are important, but they're not important.
But yeah,
And what is it?
exactly. And you want to be looking more at like,
Right there. Yep.
just between that's
Behind the, yeah, I
thing.
want to look behind the truck. You want to look at the pipeways. You want to see what cable runs, because all that cable needs to be replaced. All the control line needs to be replaced. Pipeways will collapse. Yeah. But it doesn't look like those two tanks have collapsed, but I don't see any of the tanks that are supposed to be next to them. So yeah, we'll have to, let's see. Oh, by the way, just if anybody wants to read the Radio Free Europe published original refinery damage assessment, you can get that through Radio Free Europe, or if you want me to help you link to it, I can. But remember, that's now a year old, and everything that we reported in that original refinery strikes has now all basically been repeated in better form in the month of August.
Yeah. So a couple more, I guess, stills from other imagery there, so you can see something coming out over there.
Well, that's water spraying onto the side, I think.
But it's spraying onto it, yeah.
Yeah, but so those tanks look undamaged, but the metallurgically, those tanks won't be usable.
Right. So what, they'd have to drain them and then rebuild them?
They'll have to empty them and tear them down and rebuild them.
Yeah. And they're similar probably applies to that.
Yeah, similar, but maybe they'll have to inspect them. And if they've, Russia might try to keep them in service, but they're not going to last very long. They'll have incredibly bad corrosion problems and possibly fuel quality problems from storing things in those tanks if they try to use them in their damaged form.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, as we draw to the end, I just want to say, look, mate, JP, you should compare your Aussie accents. All right, Julian. Yeah. Look,
yeah, let's do that.
Let's do that, mate. Look, give me some Aussie, and look, I'll see what you sound like, mate.
I can't put it on for it. No, I've only lived in Australia for 35 years, so I haven't really developed one yet. But stick around, mate. We'll try to do the best for you sometime in the future.
Yes. Yeah, we'll go for a slab of beer, and then we'll talk about it then. Yeah, I was backpacking in Australia in 1996 and had one heck of a time. Good times there, good times. My stories of Byron Bay and Simbin, and then going down to live in Manly and surfing in off Manly Beach, and then down in Melbourne, all over Melbourne. I was living Karori, Frankston, all over in the centre. Yeah, and then I bloody loved Australia. It's good times.
Good. Well, thanks for having me, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure. And
yes,
happy to come back and have a chat sometime when some new stuff develops.
For sure. So I think you passed the initiation with the team here, and they've given you the seal of approval. And yeah, let's do this again. Awesome stuff. Okay, well, look, stay on the line, and I'll say a proper goodbye. But in the meantime, thank you to the audience. Thank you for all the supporters of the channel. Really, really appreciate it. It keeps the lights on. I literally wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if you guys weren't able to support. So thank you. And just last of all, so thank you to Will. Where can we find you, Will? As someone says, other than the Radio Free article, where can we get the benefit of Will's expertise?
Well, unfortunately, I do 5 segments a week on Volia Radio, which is on Twitter. So the platform we use is like live radio, but our reach is terrible because nobody's on Twitter anymore. But if Volia Radio at Volia4UA on Twitter. And you can see not just my segments, but everybody who's doing one. And we do a lot of, like you do, platforming of fundraisers, news and advocacy for Ukraine. That's it. And it's also on Spotify. So any of the segments that we've got are all captured and sent to Spotify. That segment there I did this morning on Ukrainian language is already up on Spotify, I believe, from Ukrainian Catholic University. So yeah, you can catch me over there or on Twitter. I usually shit post 7 days a week.
Well, Will Thiel, there is as
best avatar of all time.
That's a nice Crocodile Dundee. I've got a Peaky Blinders one where I've got like a Peaky Blinders hat, my sideburns, and a glass of whiskey and whatnot. So
and yeah. you know the way you get the best avatar of all time. You have a NAFO forger do it, and you say, "I don't have any input for you. I'm Will Thiel from Australia. Please make my avatar." And boom, that's what you get.
Happy days. Happy days.
Cheers.
Mate. Well, look, stay online, but thank you very much to everyone else. Really appreciate Will's time here. Take care. Check out my output for the rest of the day, and hopefully check out next time that Will's on, and we'll talk more. In the meantime, everybody, toodle pips.
Toodle pip.